The winds howled across the barren expanse of the alien planet, carrying with them a chorus of whispers that seemed to echo from every jagged rock and shadowed crevice. The air shimmered with an eerie luminescence, as if the very atmosphere was alive, pulsing with an energy both foreign and hostile. This was Zytherian 7, a world spoken of only in hushed tones among human colonies, a place where survival was not guaranteed, and legends were born out of sheer desperation. Among the scattered ruins of what might have once been a great civilization, now reduced to crumbling spires and skeletal remains of towering structures, there existed a name whispered even more softly than the planet itself, the Alien Queen. She was no mere myth but a living embodiment of terror, a being whose presence loomed over the land like a storm cloud refusing to dissipate. Her dominion stretched far beyond the visible horizon, her power woven into the fabric of the planet itself. To speak her name aloud was to invite misfortune. To cross her path was considered a death sentence. The stories about her were legion, each one darker than the last. Some claimed she had lived for centuries, her life force sustained by the same strange energies that coursed through the planet. Others said she could command the elements themselves, summoning storms or quakes at will to crush those who dared trespass on her territory. But it wasn't just her physical prowess that made her feared, it was her mind. Tales spoke of her intelligence, sharp and calculating, capable of unraveling the most intricate plans laid against her. She was said to be able to sense fear, to feed off it, drawing strength from the despair of her enemies. Humanity had come to Zytherian 7 seeking resources, precious minerals buried deep beneath its surface, vital for sustaining their interstellar empire. Yet, every expedition sent to mine these treasures ended in disaster. Ships crashed under mysterious circumstances, crews vanished without a trace, and survivors returned traumatized, babbling incoherently about glowing eyes watching them from the darkness. It didn't take long before the military stepped in, deploying heavily armed units to secure the area. Even they faltered. Entire platoons disappeared overnight, their equipment left behind as if abandoned in haste. The few who managed to escape brought back harrowing accounts of encounters with something, or someone, they couldn't fully describe. They called her Untouchable, a word imbued with equal parts awe and dread. Yet, despite all this, humanity persisted. Driven by greed, necessity, or perhaps sheer stubbornness, they refused to abandon the planet. Commanders devised new strategies, scientists developed advanced weaponry, and soldiers trained harder than ever before. And still, the Alien Queen remained an insurmountable obstacle, her influence unbroken, her wrath unmatched. She was not just a threat, she was a symbol of everything humanity could not conquer, a reminder of their fragility in the face of the unknown. It was within this crucible of fear and failure that Captain Elias Voss found himself stationed. A decorated soldier known for his unshakable resolve and tactical brilliance, he had been handpicked to lead yet another mission into the heart of Zytherian 7's most treacherous regions. The briefing had been terse, almost dismissive, as though the higher-ups expected nothing less than another casualty report. "Neutralize the threat," they had ordered, their voices devoid of hope. Neutralize. As if such a thing were possible. Elias stood now at the edge of the encampment, staring out into the endless wasteland beyond. His helmet rested under one arm, leaving his face exposed to the biting wind. He could feel the weight of countless failures pressing down on him, the ghosts of soldiers who had come before, their faces etched into his memory. Each one had believed they could succeed where others had failed. Each one had been wrong. But Elias was different. Or so he told himself. Where others saw impossibility, he saw opportunity. Where others recoiled in fear, he felt a spark of defiance ignite within him. Perhaps it was arrogance, or perhaps it was madness, but somewhere deep inside, he harbored a conviction that bordered on obsession, the belief that the Alien Queen was not untouchable. That she could be understood, confronted, and ultimately defeated. It wasn't just duty driving him, it was something far more personal, a need to prove that humanity was not so easily broken. As he turned back toward the camp, his gaze fell upon the assembled troops. Their faces were grim, their movements mechanical, as though already resigned to their fate. They had heard the stories, seen the scars left behind by previous missions. Fear hung heavy in the air, palpable and suffocating. But Elias knew fear well. He had faced it countless times before, on battlefields across the galaxy. And he knew one truth above all else. Fear could either cripple you or make you stronger. It was a choice. He clenched his fists, feeling the rough texture of his gloves against his skin. Somewhere out there, beyond the jagged cliffs and swirling mists, the alien queen awaited. Untouchable, they said. Dangerous, they warned. But Elias Voss did not believe in limits, not when lives depended on breaking them. With a final glance at the horizon, he strode back into the camp, determination burning in his chest like a flame that refused to be extinguished. The encampment buzzed with subdued tension as Elias moved among the soldiers, his presence commanding attention without effort. He stopped near a cluster of officers huddled around a holographic map projected onto a portable console. The image depicted the terrain ahead, marked with red zones indicating areas of heightened danger. At the center of it all was a pulsating icon labeled simply as HQ, the suspected location of the alien queen's stronghold. "Sir," Lieutenant Mara Callan greeted him, her voice steady but tinged with unease. She gestured toward the map. "We've analyzed the data from the last reconnaissance drone. The readings confirm increased biosignatures converging here." Her finger hovered over the glowing icon. "If we're going to strike, it has to be precise. Any deviation risks triggering whatever defenses she has." Elias studied the map intently, his jaw tightening. "Defenses we don't fully understand," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Turning to the group, he addressed them directly. "This isn't just another skirmish. We're walking into the lion's den, and everyone knows it. But let me remind you why we're here, to ensure humanity doesn't lose this fight. Not today." His words hung in the air, met with a mixture of nods and uneasy silence. Among the gathered soldiers, skepticism simmered beneath the surface. Corporal Jax Rennick, a grizzled veteran with scars crisscrossing his face, stepped forward, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "Captain," he began, his tone laced with barely concealed frustration, "respectfully, I think you're underestimating what we're up against. Every team that's gone after her hasn't come back. What makes you think we'll fare any better?" Elias met Jax's gaze without flinching. "Because hesitation is what kills us," he replied firmly. "Every time we approach this mission thinking she's invincible, we fail before we even start. I'm not asking you to believe she's weak, I'm asking you to believe we aren't." Jax opened his mouth to retort, but Elias cut him off. "I know the stories. I've read the reports. But tell me this, how many of those teams went in expecting to win? How many truly believed they could stand toe-to-toe with her and walk away?" He paused, letting the question sink in. "Fear blinds us. Doubt paralyzes us. If we go in expecting defeat, then that's exactly what we'll find." Mara interjected cautiously, her brow furrowed. "Sir," Morales sighed, "the logistics are brutal. Even if we manage to breach HQ, what's the plan once we're inside? Engage her directly? You've seen the footage. She moves faster than anything we've encountered. And those tendrils, or whatever they are, they can tear through armor like paper." Elias nodded slowly, acknowledging the validity of her concerns. "You're right. We can't rely solely on brute force. That's why precision matters. We hit hard, fast, and leave no room for error. No retreat, no fallback positions. We commit completely or not at all." He pointed to the map again, tracing a route with his finger. "We'll use the natural choke points in the terrain to funnel her movements. Explosives prepped along key points to collapse tunnels if necessary. And—" he locked eyes with each officer in turn, his expression unwavering. "We trust each other. No second-guessing. No holding back because someone thinks it's hopeless." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. For a moment, doubt lingered in the air, thick enough to choke on. Then, unexpectedly, Private Lyra Vance, a young medic with wide, uncertain eyes, spoke up. What if she's smarter than we expect? Smarter than any of us combined? What if she sees right through whatever we try?" Elias turned to her, his voice softening slightly. "Then we adapt. Intelligence isn't just hers to wield. She may know how to hunt, but we know how to survive. That's our advantage." He straightened, addressing the entire group once more. "Listen to me. I'm not blind to the risks. I'm not deaf to the warnings. But I refuse to accept that we're powerless. If we go in united, if we move with purpose, then maybe, just maybe, we can change the outcome." As he finished speaking, the soldiers exchanged glances, some nodding reluctantly while others remained unconvinced. Jack sighed deeply, shaking his head. "You're asking us to bet our lives on faith, Captain. Faith in you, faith in ourselves. Hope's a dangerous gamble." "It always is," Elias countered. "But sometimes, it's the only card we've got." With that, he dismissed the meeting, leaving the officers to finalize preparations. As they dispersed, Elias lingered by the map, staring at the glowing icon of the alien queen's stronghold. Behind him, Mara hesitated, then approached cautiously. "Do you really believe we can do this?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with both curiosity and doubt. Elias didn't look at her immediately. When he finally did, his expression was resolute, bordering on defiant. "Yes," he said simply. "Because if I don't, none of them will." The march toward the alien queen's stronghold was a symphony of tension and trepidation, each step carrying the weight of uncertainty. The landscape shifted subtly as they ventured deeper into the alien terrain, the jagged rocks giving way to smoother, almost organic formations that pulsed faintly with an inner light. The air grew heavier, charged with an energy that prickled against their skin even through their protective suits. Every sound, the crunch of boots on uneven ground, the occasional crackle of static over comms, seemed amplified, as though the planet itself was listening. Elias led the way, his rifle slung across his back, his focus razor-sharp. He scanned the horizon constantly, his instincts honed by years of combat experience. Beside him, Mara maintained a vigilant watch, her scanner sweeping for anomalies while her free hand hovered near her sidearm. Behind them, the squad moved in disciplined formation, their movements synchronized but strained, the oppressive atmosphere gnawing at their resolve. Conversations were sparse, limited to terse exchanges about navigation or equipment checks. The silence between words felt heavier than the gear they carried. As they neared the first choke point, a narrow canyon flanked by towering walls of crystalline stone, Elias signaled for a halt. The team crouched low, weapons ready, as he consulted the map displayed on his wrist console. "This is it," he whispered, pointing ahead. "From here, we stick to the plan. No deviations. Keep your eyes sharp." Jax, positioned near the rear, muttered under his breath, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Stick to the plan." "Right. Because plans always work out perfectly in situations like this." His sarcasm earned him a sharp glare from Lyra, who knelt beside him, clutching her medkit tightly. "Enough," Elias snapped, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Negative talk stays behind." "Got it." Jack scowled but nodded curtly, falling silent. They pressed on, navigating the canyon with painstaking care. The walls loomed high above them, casting long shadows that danced eerily in the dim light. Strange symbols etched into the stone caught Elias's eye, glyphs that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed too long. He forced himself to look away, focusing instead on the path ahead. The glyphs weren't important now. Survival was. The further they advanced, the more pronounced the changes in the environment became. The ground beneath their feet transitioned from rocky soil to something slick and gelatinous, clinging to their boots with each step. Faint, rhythmic vibrations echoed through the canyon, growing stronger as they progressed. It wasn't until they reached a wide clearing that the source became apparent. At the center of the clearing stood a massive structure unlike anything they had seen before. Its form defied description, a chaotic blend of curves and angles that seemed to twist and contort as they watched. The material it was made of shimmered with iridescent hues, reflecting the dim light in ways that disoriented the eye. From its base radiated thick, vein-like tendrils that burrowed into the earth, pulsating with a slow, steady rhythm. It was alive, or at least, it appeared to be. This is HQ? Mara breathed, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and dread. She adjusted her scanner, which emitted a series of frantic beeps as it struggled to process the readings. Biosignatures are off the charts. Whatever this thing is, it's not just a building. Elias stepped forward cautiously, his rifle raised. "Stay alert. This is where things get tricky. He glanced back at the squad, ensuring everyone was in position. Remember the plan. Stick together, and don't engage unless absolutely necessary. As they approached the structure, the vibrations intensified, resonating in their chests like a heartbeat. The air grew colder, despite the lack of wind, and a faint hum filled their ears, rising in pitch until it bordered on painful. Several soldiers winced, instinctively covering their ears, but Elias barked an order to keep moving. They couldn't afford to stop now. The entrance to the structure yawned open before them, a gaping maw lined with jagged edges that gleamed wetly in the dim light. Inside, the passage sloped downward, disappearing into darkness. Elias hesitated only briefly before signaling the team to proceed. One by one, they filed in, their helmet lights cutting through the gloom. The interior was unlike anything they had anticipated. The walls were smooth and fleshy, pulsating gently as though breathing. Strange, bioluminescent growths clung to the ceiling, casting an unsettling greenish glow that illuminated the passage. The air smelled acrid, metallic, and faintly sweet, a combination that made their stomachs churn. The vibrations continued, louder now, reverberating through the walls and floor. "Feels like we're walking into a giant organism," Jax muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum. "Like we're parasites invading its body." "Don't say that," Lyra hissed, her voice tight with anxiety. "Just don't." They moved deeper, the passage narrowing until they were forced to walk single file. The oppressive atmosphere weighed heavily on them, sapping their energy and testing their resolve. Several times, Elias had to pause and remind the team to stay focused, to push through the discomfort. Each step felt like an eternity, the anticipation of what lay ahead gnawing at their minds. Then, without warning, the passage opened into a vast chamber. The sudden expanse caught them off guard, their lights revealing only a fraction of the space. Towering pillars spiraled upward, disappearing into the darkness above. Between them stretched a network of suspended platforms, connected by thin, translucent bridges that swayed gently as though alive. At the far end of the chamber, partially obscured by shadows, loomed a massive throne-like construct. And seated upon it was the alien queen. Her presence was overwhelming, commanding attention even from a distance. She was taller than any of them, her form sleek and predatory, exuding an aura of raw power. Her skin, or whatever passed for it, was a shifting mosaic of colors, reflecting the dim light in mesmerizing patterns. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, piercing through the darkness and locking onto the intruders with unnerving precision. For a moment, no one moved. The squad froze, their training momentarily overridden by sheer instinct. Elias felt his heart hammering in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm, to maintain control. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his rifle, aiming it squarely at the figure on the throne. "You've come far," a voice echoed through the chamber, low and melodic, yet laced with menace. It wasn't clear whether the words were spoken aloud or projected directly into their minds. Either way, they sent shivers down their spines. "Few have dared to enter my domain. Fewer still have survived to regret it." Elias swallowed hard, his grip tightening on his weapon. "We're not here to negotiate," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Your reign ends today." The alien queen tilted her head, studying him with an expression that bordered on amusement. "Brave words for someone so small. Tell me, human, what makes you think you stand a chance against me?" Before Elias could respond, a low rumble shook the chamber, followed by the sound of movement. From the shadows emerged dozens of smaller creatures, their forms vaguely humanoid but grotesquely distorted. They moved with unnatural speed, surrounding the squad in moments, their glowing eyes fixed hungrily on the intruders. Elias's mind raced, calculating options. Retreat was impossible. They were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. But surrender wasn't an option either. He glanced at his team, seeing the fear etched into their faces but also the determination that had brought them this far. They had come too far to give up now. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. "Follow my lead. And remember, she's not untouchable." With that, he fired the first shot, the sharp crack of his rifle echoing through the chamber like a declaration of war. The chamber erupted into chaos as the first shot rang out, the bullet striking one of the smaller creatures with a sickening thud. It let out a shrill, ear-piercing shriek before collapsing, its body twitching violently before going still. The sound seemed to galvanize the rest of the swarm, their glowing eyes narrowing in unison as they surged forward with terrifying speed. Elias pivoted sharply, firing in controlled bursts as he shouted orders to his team. "Flank them. Don't let them surround us." His voice was a steadying anchor amidst the cacophony of gunfire and guttural cries. The soldiers responded with practiced precision, forming a defensive perimeter as they unleashed a barrage of bullets into the advancing horde. Sparks flew as rounds ricocheted off the creature's chitinous hides, but enough found their marks to send several stumbling backward, writhing in agony. Mara darted to the side, her movements fluid and deliberate as she deployed a concussion grenade. The device detonated with a deafening roar, sending a shockwave rippling through the chamber. Dozens of the smaller creatures were hurled backward, their bodies slamming into the walls or tumbling off the precarious bridges. For a fleeting moment, the squad gained some breathing room, regrouping as they reloaded their weapons. But the reprieve was short-lived. From the shadows emerged more of the grotesque figures, their numbers seemingly endless. Worse still, the alien queen herself rose from her throne, her towering form casting an ominous silhouette against the dim light. She moved with an elegance that belied her size, each step resonating like thunder. Her glowing eyes locked onto Elias, and a low, guttural laugh echoed through the chamber, chilling them to their cores. "You persist," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "How quaint. Shall I reward your bravery by tearing you apart piece by piece?" Elias ignored the taunt, his focus unwavering. He signaled to Jax, who nodded grimly and lobbed another explosive charge toward the nearest cluster of creatures. The resulting blast tore through their ranks, scattering limbs and viscera across the chamber floor. Yet even as the smoke cleared, new figures emerged from the darkness, undeterred by the carnage. Lyra crouched behind a fallen pillar, her hands trembling as she administered a stimulant to a wounded soldier. Blood seeped through the cracks in his armor, and his breathing was labored, but he gritted his teeth and nodded when she urged him back into the fight. "Stay alive," she whispered, her voice cracking under the strain. "Just stay alive." The battle raged on, a blur of motion and noise. Bullets whizzed past, narrowly missing their targets, while the creatures lunged with claws extended, forcing the soldiers to dodge and weave. One of the creatures managed to breach the perimeter, its claws slashing across a soldier's chest plate. The man cried out, stumbling backward, but Elias was there in an instant, driving the butt of his rifle into the creature's skull with brutal efficiency. It crumpled to the ground, twitching before lying still. Despite their efforts, the tide of enemies showed no sign of abating. The squad's ammunition dwindled rapidly, and fatigue began to set in. Sweat poured down their faces, mixing with the grime of battle, and their movements grew sluggish. Even Elias, who had pushed himself beyond his limits countless times before, felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. But he refused to yield, his resolve burning brighter with each passing second. "Fall back to the bridge," he commanded, his voice hoarse but authoritative. "We hold the line there." The team obeyed, retreating in orderly fashion despite the chaos around them. They formed a new defensive line atop one of the translucent bridges, using its narrow width to their advantage. The creatures hesitated for a moment, their glowing eyes scanning the precarious pathway before surging forward once more. The bridge groaned under their combined weight, swaying dangerously as the soldiers fought desperately to hold their ground. Amidst the melee, Elias caught sight of the alien queen advancing steadily, her gaze fixed on him with predatory intent. She moved with calculated grace, sidestepping blasts and projectiles as though anticipating their trajectories. Her presence alone seemed to embolden her minions, driving them to attack with renewed ferocity. Elias fired repeatedly at her, each shot striking true but failing to penetrate her resilient exterior. She laughed again, the sound reverberating through the chamber like a death knell. "Your weapons are toys," she sneered. "Pathetic attempts to challenge what you cannot comprehend." He gritted his teeth, refusing to let her words shake him. Instead, he activated a thermal charge strapped to his belt, priming it for detonation. "Maybe," he growled, his voice low and fierce. "But even gods bleed." With that, he hurled the charge directly at her feet. The explosion engulfed her in a fiery inferno, the heat intense enough to warp the air around her. For a brief moment, she staggered, her composure faltering as tendrils of smoke curled around her form. The squad seized the opportunity, unleashing everything they had left in a concentrated assault. Bullets, grenades, and energy blasts converged on her position, forcing her to retreat momentarily. But it wasn't enough. As the smoke cleared, she stood tall once more, her skin scorched but intact. Her eyes burned with fury, and a deep, resonant growl emanated from her throat. "Foolish humans," she snarled. "You dare test me? Very well. Let us see how far your courage takes you." She raised her arms, and the chamber trembled violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls, and chunks of debris rained down from above. The suspended platform swayed precariously, threatening to collapse under the strain. Panic rippled through the squad as they struggled to maintain their footing, their cohesion beginning to fray. Elias steadied himself, his mind racing. They couldn't win this fight, not like this. Not with brute force alone. There had to be another way, something they hadn't considered. Something unexpected. "Mara!" he shouted over the din. "The glyphs. Use the scanner on the glyphs." She hesitated for a split second, then nodded, pulling out her handheld device. Her fingers flew over the controls as she scanned the walls, searching for anything that might give them an edge. The rest of the squad held the line, their movements growing increasingly desperate as the creatures closed in from all sides. Finally, Mara's eyes widened, and she looked up at Elias. "There's a pattern," she yelled. "A frequency embedded in the glyphs. It's disrupting our systems, but if we sync our comms to it—" "Do it," Elias barked. "Now." Mara adjusted the settings on her scanner, broadcasting the frequency across their communication channels. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the creatures began to falter, their movements becoming erratic. Some stumbled, clutching at their heads as though in pain, while others froze entirely, their glowing eyes dimming. The alien queen roared in outrage, her form convulsing as the frequency affected her as well. She lashed out blindly, her tendrils whipping through the air, but her attacks lacked their earlier precision. Seizing the moment, Elias rallied his team, leading a final charge toward her position. They moved as one, their steps synchronized despite their exhaustion. Bullets flew, grenades detonated, and energy beams sliced through the air, targeting the weakened queen. She fought back with everything she had, her claws rending flesh and metal alike, but the combined assault overwhelmed her defenses. And yet, even as they pressed their advantage, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they were merely scratching the surface. The alien queen was powerful, yes, but she was also intelligent. Cunning. This wasn't over. Not yet. As the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded into an uneasy quiet, Elias stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. The chamber was a scene of devastation. Smoke curled lazily from charred sections of the organic walls, and the remnants of the smaller creatures lay scattered across the floor, their grotesque forms twisted and broken. The bridge they had defended hung precariously, its translucent surface cracked and sagging under the strain of the earlier explosions. Despite the apparent victory, the oppressive atmosphere lingered, as if the planet itself refused to acknowledge their triumph. The alien queen, however, remained standing. Though battered and visibly weakened, her towering form still commanded the space, her glowing eyes burning with a mixture of fury and something else, something Elias couldn't quite place. Was it curiosity, contempt, or perhaps calculation? She regarded him silently, her chest rising and falling with labored breaths, her clawed hands twitching at her sides as though itching to lash out again. But she didn't move. Not yet. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle, his muscles coiled like springs, ready to react at a moment's notice. Around him, the surviving members of his squad regrouped, their faces pale but determined. Mara clutched her scanner tightly, her knuckles white as she monitored the frequency that had temporarily incapacitated the Queen's forces. Jax leaned heavily on his weapon, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead, while Lyra tended to the wounded, her hands trembling as she applied Medigel to a deep laceration on one soldier's arm. They were alive for now, but the cost of their survival was etched into every exhausted expression, every labored breath. "You're persistent," the alien queen finally spoke, her melodic voice laced with venom. "I'll grant you that." She took a step forward, her movements deliberate, almost cautious. The ground trembled faintly beneath her weight, and the remaining tendrils lining the walls quivered in response, as though attuned to her presence. "But persistence alone won't save you." Elias didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her, searching for any sign of vulnerability, any weakness he could exploit. Her resilience was unnerving. Even after everything they had thrown at her, she still stood tall, her aura of dominance undiminished. Yet, there was something in her demeanor now that hadn't been there before. A flicker of uncertainty, perhaps, or maybe even respect. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "What do you want?" Elias asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the tense silence. The question caught the others off guard, and several pairs of eyes darted toward him in surprise. Even the alien queen paused, tilting her head slightly as though considering his words. "What I want," she repeated, her tone mocking but tinged with genuine curiosity. "You presume to understand my desires, human?" "I presume nothing," Elias countered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "But you're still here. Still fighting. Why? If you wanted us dead, you could have ended this long ago. So what is it you're after?" The queen's lips curled into a faint smile, though it held no warmth. "Clever," she murmured, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Perhaps you're not as simple-minded as the rest of your kind." She took another step closer, her movements slow and measured, as if gauging his reaction. "Very well. Since you've amused me thus far, I'll indulge your curiosity. What I want is balance." "Balance?" Elias echoed, his brow furrowing. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, her voice dropping to a low, almost hypnotic cadence, "that your kind disrupts the harmony of this world. Your machines, your greed, your relentless hunger for conquest, they poison the essence of Zytherian 7. You carve wounds into its flesh, and I am its immune system, tasked with expelling the infection." Elias frowned, processing her words. "So you see us as a disease." "A plague," she corrected sharply. "One that must be eradicated before it spreads further." "And what about balance for us?" Elias shot back, his tone hardening. "We came here seeking resources to survive, to build a future for our people. Are we supposed to just vanish because you deem us unworthy?" The queen's smile widened, though it remained cold and calculating. "Survival is not a right, human. It is earned. Prove yourselves worthy, and perhaps we might coexist. Fail, and you will join the countless others who have perished beneath my claws." Elias clenched his jaw, his mind racing. Her words struck a chord, stirring emotions he hadn't anticipated. Guilt, anger, defiance, they all swirled within him, vying for dominance. He glanced at his team, seeing the same conflicted expressions mirrored on their faces. They had been trained to follow orders, to eliminate threats without question. But this was different. This wasn't just a battle for territory or resources. It was a clash of ideologies, of perspectives on existence itself. "We're not leaving," Elias declared firmly, his voice ringing out with conviction. "Not because we're stubborn or reckless, but because we have no choice. Humanity survives by adapting, by finding solutions where none seem possible. If balance is what you seek, then show us how to achieve it. Otherwise," he raised his rifle slightly, his stance unwavering, "we'll carve our own path, consequences be damned." For a long moment, the queen said nothing. She simply stared at him, her glowing eyes boring into his soul as though trying to decipher the truth behind his words. Then, slowly, she lowered her arms, her claws retracting slightly. "You intrigue me, human," she admitted, her tone softer now, almost contemplative. "Most would have fled by now, broken under the weight of despair. Yet you stand firm, even when faced with annihilation." "Despair doesn't define us," Elias replied, his voice quieter but no less resolute. Hope does. The queen let out a low, rumbling chuckle, though it lacked malice this time. Hope, she echoed, tasting the word as though it were foreign to her. A dangerous concept, yet one I cannot deny fuels your resolve. She straightened, her towering form casting a long shadow over the chamber. Very well, Elias Voss. I shall grant you this much, a reprieve. But know this, if you fail to prove yourselves worthy, I will not hesitate to finish what I started. With that, she turned and began to retreat, her movements graceful despite her injuries. The tendrils lining the walls retracted, and the pulsating rhythm of the chamber slowed, as though the planet itself was exhaling. The surviving creatures followed her, melting back into the shadows from which they had emerged. As the last of them disappeared, the squad exhaled collectively, the tension easing slightly but not entirely dissipating. They were alive, yes, but the encounter had left them shaken, their understanding of the situation irrevocably altered. Elias lowered his rifle, his shoulders sagging under the weight of what had transpired. "What now, sir?" Mara asked quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was hesitant, uncertain. Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to face the throne-like construct at the far end of the chamber, his gaze distant. "Now," he said finally, his voice heavy with resolve, "we find a way to earn her respect. Because if we don't, none of this will matter." Elias turned to his team, their weary faces illuminated by the dim light. "We've been given a chance," he said, his voice firm despite the exhaustion etched into his features. "Not just to survive, but to prove we're more than invaders. We adapt, we learn, and we find balance, on our terms." The squad exchanged uncertain glances, but nodded, resolve flickering back to life in their eyes. Mara stepped forward, her scanner still humming softly. "Then we start here," she said, gesturing to the alien glyphs pulsing faintly on the walls. "If she speaks through this world, maybe it can teach us how to coexist." Jax grunted, wiping blood from his brow. "Or it kills us trying." Elias smiled faintly, gripping his rifle tighter. "Either way, we don't stop. Not now." And with that, they moved deeper into the chamber, ready to face whatever truths, or trials, awaited them.